Hello, my name is Ry Russo-Young, and I'm a filmmaker living in Los Angeles.
I'm Emily Nam. We are art people.
All the directors that I look at, whose careers I really respect, who have made really interesting work, from literally like Robert Altman to Darren Aronofsky to like, anyone, you name it, Agnes Varda. It's like they've made different kinds of movies and their career as a career has fluctuated. They've had movies that are really successful, they've had movies that aren't, that nobody watches, that people don't like or slam. And they're still an incredible artist, and you can't sort of like be at the behest of what other people think of you and of the trends or the times. Like, you have to kind of beat to your own drum in your own creative way, and be inspired of what you're going to be creatively into and excited by. And I think that that's something that I keep and hold close and remind myself of often.
Ry Russo-Young is a New York-born filmmaker living and working in Los Angeles, California. Through a natural evolution of becoming, storytelling and character exploration has been embedded in her since a young age, patching together short movies with friends and family, and her mother's taking photographs of her in the Meatpacking District in the 90s, dressed up as Cindy Sherman-esque characters. Ry's three-part documentary series Nuclear Family was released with HBO in 2021. It is a real-life and expose of Ry's understanding and experience of being the daughter of two lesbian mothers who conceived Ry and her sister Cade with known sperm donors at a time when the concept of an LGBTQ family was untravelled. The series, which Ry wrote, directed, and featured in, navigates this origin story and the perspectives of those around her. What Evolved is an intimate telling where Ry herself candidly processes her unresolved feelings and takes the viewer on an emotional journey of healing, and invokes us to comprehend the complex nature of family and relationships. We discuss Ry's process for and taking time to find the best version of a project, and her journey of adapting stories into a visual form. Navigating the balance of being an independent filmmaker and pursuing creative work within a commercial realm and by Hollywood's lure, Ry's determination to forge her own path and engage in projects that speak to her is a testament visible in the integrity of her work. Hi, Ry. It's lovely to speak with you today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Great to be here.
That's good. And you are in LA now living with your family?
I live in Los Angeles, yes. I'm from New York. I go back often, but I'm here.
Yeah. And so you grew up in New York City.
I did in the
Yes.
West Village.
And how was that as a child living in, we'll just go back, you're a filmmaker and narrative and documentary films dealing with the psychological and the experience of being a human. We'll just say in a very general
Sure.
way. How has New York influenced your creative uh, heartbeat or creative sense of the world and exploring what is possible?
It's tricky because I don't have anything to compare it to. It's not like
Mm,
I know if I grew up in Massachusetts what I would have been like, or, even on the West Coast. I think more than anything, my family has influenced who I am and my work to a certain extent. But New York always felt, I mean, New York has, I should just say, like, New York has gentrified so much over the course of me living there. Like, I remember as a kid living in the West Village. The West Village wasn't, what it is today at all. It was no man's land. We had to go to Tribeca to the Food Emporium. That was like our local supermarket, which was far. Now there's a Brooklyn Fair 2 blocks away. And it was all graffiti covered. There were a lot of trans prostitutes that guys from New Jersey would come and pick up in their cars. Um, it was just very empty. There was no, some people living there, but very few stores, mainly like artists, no man's land vibe. So watching it over all these years kind of become what it is now, has been an interesting process.
was it safe? Did you feel safe as a child, or were you quite free we'll talk about your family and parents. It felt like you had a very supportive network.
Yeah. Um I think under 10, because I was born in 1981, so I think in the 80s it was not particularly safe. Um but in the 90s it started to get more safe, and I remember taking like the train to school in high school, and that felt totally safe by then. It was very cleaned up by that point, I think. Uh yeah.
So you've documented, can we talk about nuclear family? Um, you've documented a lot of your upbringing and some significant moments in your childhood. And I wanted to, it wasn't the first film that you made, but I wanted to maybe understand when you started making films, because through that documentary, there's a lot of uh, footage from younger years of your life.
So, okay, so when did I start making movies, basically?
Or
I
when
mean,
did you start finding a connection to the visual image and to a camera?
well, yeah, I mean, as a kid, I was the kind of kid who played imaginary games. That's what my parents called it, like pretend. I was huge on dressing anybody up that would hang out with me and playing, you're the princess and I'm the orphan and we're running away to wherever, on a train in a boxcar. So I would, a really young kid, create these sort of elaborate pretend scenarios. I would go into my room alone after school and just talk to myself and be in my own world. And that always felt really, um, kind of like it actually calmed me down and made me feel more sane. Like my moms would literally say, you seem like you need to go have some alone time, basically have some pretend time, because I would be, I guess, in a really bad mood is what they would say, until I had that kind of time. So, and then when I was in fifth grade, I played Gollum in The Hobbit in the school play. And when I kind of discovered acting, I was like amazed that there was a sanctioned, that this was like a real thing in society, that this was something actually that people did, and that it wasn't just me being a weirdo in my room, that it was like called like, oh, we could all play pretend together and we're participating, and it's like something you can do at school, and this is incredible. So that was like a revelation. And then I did some acting in middle school and took classes and did like a summer Shakespeare program, and sort of loved that process of participating in these pretend worlds, and got into photography, um, in early high school, and was doing a, sort of like Cindy Sherman-esque, scenarios of like I would dress up like a prostitute and have my mom shoot me in the old meatpacking district, with a suitcase again, or like all these kind of. And then I discovered Cindy Sherman. Someone said, "Oh, you should look at Cindy Sherman." I was like, "Oh, it's been done already. Oh no!" Like I thought I was, I thought I had this like whole vision of like what photography could be, and then I realized that someone was doing it so well and incredible.
Yes, so well.
And then I basically realized, so I was sort of trying to tell stories through still images in that work. And then I realized, like, again, this is high school. Oh, images can move and tell stories. And that was film, of course. So then my senior year of high school, I made a film with my best friend Lola together that starred her grandmother, and a few friends of ours. And it was an experimental film. We shot it on 16 millimeter and we painted on it. Um, and it was like people running through the woods half naked, and sort of like a Fellini inspired, um, thing. And it was amazing that my high school had 16 millimeter. And that was really fun. And I was kind of hooked from then on. That film felt like the confluence of all the things that I'd ever been interested in. And I wanted to make more and figure it out. But I wasn't sure whether I was going to be an experimental filmmaker, more like a, in the art world, or like a Hollywood filmmaker, because I wasn't necessarily, my taste wasn't necessarily so mainstream. So I didn't know where I fit in, but I knew that I loved that medium. And I also loved like performance to some extent. I loved theater. I didn't yet know what form it would take, but I knew that there was something surrounding kind of film, visuals, performance. That was like my wheelhouse for sure.
Did you think you would ever do acting or pursue that path, or for you it was about telling the story?
I mean, I did enjoy acting, and I did some of it. Like I did it through college. I was in an improv troupe in high school. Um and I was in a couple friends independent films when I started making movies. I acted in like a movie called Hannah Takes the Stairs with that Joe Swanberg directed, with Greta Gerwig and Mark Duplass and Andrew Bujowski, like in early mumblecore days, mid 2000s. So I definitely flirted with it, but I didn't really like being told what to do by other people. I was too much of a control freak. I sort of wanted to create my own thing or world or tell stories that I cared about. And I felt like the acting part of it felt a little powerless to me. I didn't have any control over my fate. I was going to what? I was going to audition and wait for people to cast me. And I wasn't sort of conventionally beautiful. So I felt like I was just going to be the um weird best friend. Like I didn't see it wasn't even just I didn't even think that far ahead really, but I just had that instinct that I wanted to be more in control over the worlds and my fate, and that making things felt like I was taking the reins versus being a horse that somebody else was whipping. So yes, but I quickly figured out that that wasn't where I was going to be most satisfied.
I want to just go back a bit to your stories that you were telling as a child. Were they like made up friends, or you were making up stories and narratives?
I did have an imaginary friend growing up named Helivana. Um, but for the most part, they were just made up stories, but I think they were super based on like the movies that I was watching, based on like Disney fairy tales. And I was really into, maybe it was from Annie or something, like orphanages and kids who were running away from it was like a mixture of like royalty and sort of juvenile delinquency. It was kind
Mm-hmm.
of a confluence of those two things.
So what comes has and we spoke about this already, is when I think about your work, there's this huge storytelling, and it's also in my mind at the moment about myths and narrative as a way to understand the human psyche from like our own development of who we are and understanding ourselves. But in this really interesting way, we had sort of ancient myths coming through and folklore, and then now we have films telling us these stories and reflecting back to us these, in your case, really, I feel, powerful human complex situations. And is that something, and this maybe we need to talk about nuclear family, because I think, did you intend to be dealing with deep problems, in not problems, deep considerations of like becoming or navigating the self? I know that's a complex question to ask, but
Um, okay, yeah, we can jump ahead totally. Okay, so with Nuclear Family, I mean, I think we should just say what it is. It's a three-part documentary series that is on that was on HBO, is on Max, and it's about my known sperm donor suing my lesbian mothers for visitation of me when I was 9 years old. And I knew one mom had me, one mom had my sister using different known donors who were both gay men in California, that they knew through a friend of a friend. And we knew them because they didn't want our biological fathers to be a mystery. That's why they didn't use a sperm bank. Um, and this was late 1979, early 80s. So it was very unchartered and there wasn't necessarily a path to do this. Um, so I think there was this kind of, we knew our sperm donors growing up, as the man who helped make us. We would visit them. It was a warm relationship. It turned sour, and my sperm donor sued for me. And it was this huge public lawsuit. It was one of the first lawsuits of its kind. Um, it was covered in the press. It lasted for over 4 years. There was an appeal. Um, and it was a really traumatic experience. And I basically, as a kid, spent so much time having to kind of defend my family in that context, in that legal context of like my lawyer asking me, or, you know, the court assigned me a lawyer asking me, like, who's your family? And is your sister your real sister? And all the, is this your father? And how do you define a father? And um, I felt like my family was under the microscope. And that experience of sort of having to, and then there was press after that I was talking about my family, and I sort of saw that experience and my lesbian family, I'm putting that in quotes, being told through other people's lenses for so long that I felt like this, I had this need, I think, in my late teens to, and into my 20s, to kind of like tell my version of that story. um so I wanted to tell that story in my own voice, but I also wanted to kind of process my feelings on how I felt about all of those events, which includes my feelings towards my biological father, which, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Nuclear Family, he died of AIDS when I was 16 after the lawsuit. So I was trying to figure out how to tell that story, and I had written a script, and this is like all throughout my 30s, and the script didn't quite, it wasn't quite clear, and it wasn't quite right, and I kept rewriting it. And what I eventually figured out in my late 30s is that um, I didn't know how I felt about my biological father. I didn't know how I felt about all the events of the film. And I was a narrative filmmaker up to that point. And so I had assumed that it was going to be a narrative film. And then I realized, sort of through development and time, that it needed to be a documentary series, or a documentary, really. I thought it was going to be a feature. And I'll just talk a little bit about how I realized that, because I think it's actually a, we don't talk about process enough when we talk about art. I think we talk so much about like the finished thing, and sometimes it takes a
Absolutely.
really long time to find really like the best version of the thing, of the work. So I got, I thought it was a narrative, and then I thought, okay, no, I'll do a hybrid, a documentary that's sort of like fiction and uses real footage, because I also had all this amazing footage from my childhood. And I applied for a Creative Capital grant, which is an incredible grant program that I really encourage people to apply to. And I got it, and I did the presentation on a hybrid model of film. And then I hired an editor with some of those funds to cut a trailer to raise money. And first, and her name is Paisy Holcomb, and she's an amazing editor. And so I hired her to do a trailer of the fiction and the doc hybrid. And she did a trailer of that. And then she said, I'd like to do a doc trailer, just a full on doc trailer. So I'm going to do that. And I was like, are you really? And she was like, yeah. And so she just did it on her own, basically, and showed it to me. And her cutting the full on doc trailer, I was like, oh, this needs to be a documentary. And I realized, like, her cutting that made me realize that. And one of the reasons that I realized that also was because it became clear to me that I didn't know how I felt about all of these events, and that was okay. And that's why it needed to be a documentary, because the making of the documentary itself would reveal to me how I felt about the events. And that was the burning question that I was going to go into making the documentary. Whereas with a fiction narrative, you have to sort of understand the entire story, soup to nuts, and close it. And I couldn't close the narrative yet.
It's something you
So,
didn't understand yourself.
right, right. So So I sort of knew, so I knew the story, you know, I knew acts 1 and 2, but act 3 was really a little bit unknown to me in terms of how all was going to land, and that became how I structured it, and the blueprint for how I sort of like saw the piece. And so at first I thought it was going to be a fiction film, right? And then I thought it was going to be a hybrid. And then when I realized it was going to be a doc, I thought it would be a feature documentary. But when I did the first rough cut, um, it was 2.5 hours long. And I realized it was 3 acts. It's just that each act needed to be an hour long. And that's when we decided to make it into a series.
So, how much of it was, I guess it was a work in progress, letting or trusting that space of letting the documentary teach you what it needed to be? In a way, it's like it had its own being of one, your own investigation, but also then telling a story.
Well, it's funny because I knew, like, I did an outline of act 1 beat by beat. You know, this happens, this happens, this happens, of act 1 and act 2. And I did a rough one of act 3, but it was a little anemic. It didn't feel quite fleshed out because I knew that there was like things in there that were unknown to me, that were undiscovered, that I would figure out later and deal with it later. Um So there was a lot that I knew, you know, like acts 1 and 2 haven't really changed, and it's sort of the story that I had been told my whole it was act 1 was really the story that I had been told my whole life, which we called origins, which was like how my family came to be, you know, and a lot of families have narratives of like this is when you were born, and this is the story of how you were born, and this is how our parents met, and this is what happened, and all of that. So that was very clear to me because it was a story I'd been told my whole life. And then act 2 was very much like the lawsuit and that experience, which I was 9, so I remember it, but it's also like this foggy childhood memory. So I have a few really, really vivid memories that are in there, but then it's also almost like a legal thriller. You know, it's like act 1 was almost like a lesbian rom-com in a way, and act 2 becomes a little bit more of this like legal thriller. Um, where the other thing that I tried to do with it is that you know, when you're a kid, you don't have a lot of agency. So my perspective isn't very strong at all in Act One, and it's sort of starting to come into being in Act Two. As my at 9, it was beginning to sort of rise, but it wasn't clear at all. So I tried to kind of mimic my coming of age and my perspective growing as the film progresses. So then in 3, that's when I really develop more of a perspective. And kind of me as a character sort of like emerges in a more clear way.
Something that I felt incredibly powerful and how vulnerable you were to go through this experience. Yes, you could have done Act One and Act Two and told a story, and that could have been a story that people could relate to, and yeah, a bit rom com. But in the third part, it's so deeply emotional, and there's this very fragile container that you're holding for yourself. Like, I've cried, I've watched it twice, and both times I'm sobbing because I think it's so deeply reflective, not of only your story, but just of human relationships and the fragility of different perspectives and understanding the truth and holding that space. And so I thought it was so brave of you to expose that part of yourself. And how was that easy for you, or was it something that kind of felt it needs to happen and I have to just do it, but I'm not comfortable with it?
I mean, that, so you're talking about the third part, which was really terrifying to me for many years to even realize what was there. You know, it was unearthing a little bit of a monster. Like, I remember I was in therapy at the time, and I said to my therapist, I feel like I'm opening the door to a dark closet and I just can't see inside. I just want to walk through the door and understand what's in there, and I can't. I don't know what's going on. Like, how do I get there? And to the credit of my producer, Dan Cogan, he said to me, because we had a rough cut, again, that was 2.5 hours long, but it didn't have this pivotal scene that is most of part three, where I go to my mom's and I ask them about the lawsuit. And he said, I think you need to go to your moms and talk to them and show them this footage that you did this interview with, a good old friend of Tom's, my biological father, and talk to them about it. And when he said that, I was like, oh no, you're right. That's true. Yes. Okay. I need to do it. And I was terrified to do it.
Mm.
But I think really like any bravery that I had is inspired by my mom's bravery, because I'm the filmmaker. So I control the edit to a certain extent. But my mother's, like, they're even braver than I am, because not only did they go through all of this where they almost had their kid taken away and it was a huge trauma for them, and they were adults at the time, they remember everything. But then they're going to trust their kid to make a film about it and sit down with her while she asks them
Very
terribly tough
confronting.
questions
Yeah.
on camera. But what I said to my moms before we did it is like, I'm going to ask you some really hard questions, but I know that we love each other and that we can get through this because we are such a strong family. That, like, I have the faith that we can do this together and say the sort of like unspeakable, or like have these hard talks, because that's the kind of family we are. And I think like we did, like we all, like, they were willing to go there with me, and they're so articulate and smart and love, filled with love, that I think. And we've been having, my growing up in like a lesbian feminist Jewish household in New York City, like, that was the culture that my mom's created, where we talk about everything and we just have it out, everything from safe sex to anorexia to like whatever it is, like we would just talk about it. um so yeah, so that was like an extension of a hard family conversation that we just were having on film.
Which was just
Yeah.
incredibly powerful and shaking, but it did show that ability to hold tension in a relationship. I mean, to confront a parent about their choices as a parent and maybe questioning whether it was a right or wrong decision, and then exposing that. It was just so well done. It's like, yeah, I don't know, like, without going into the psychology of it, it's like having a counselor right there with everyone guiding it, but you're able to hold that space, like it could be felt. It was very visceral.
Well, I mean, I just should say, like, when making the movie, I was always really afraid of having it be a quote, me and my problems documentary. I didn't want it to feel self indulgent. I think the reason that I felt like I could do it and not make it like that is because I thought my moms were really fantastic subjects. They were funny, they were self-righteous, they were strong, they were unself-conscious, so I felt they loved each other fiercely. There was a lot that I felt like, oh, these people are entertaining, like, forget me, these people are great subjects. um
Not just
and the
entertaining, but
subject
also
matter,
like
right,
sorry,
deep, no,
yeah,
deep, yeah, totally,
powerful women.
right, really powerful women. But also the subject matter, I felt, we were telling the story of the history of the gay family, basically. And so the historical context was key to the personal story. And those things, you kind of couldn't tell one without the other. And then the other thing was just that, I think all families are fascinating. When you get under the hood of any family, the dynamics are so rich in terms of the secrets, the love, the resentment, the culture, all of it is just, the confluence of all those things are fascinating. So I felt like through telling the personal, we'll get hopefully to this more universality of family dynamics that will hopefully encourage other people to have those conversations with their family, or to even think about their own family in a critical way. Yeah, and I'm going through it with my kids now. I'm like, oh shit, I hope I don't fuck them up. Like, that's all, like, I'm trying so hard to be a good parent, but it's so hard,
Well, that's, I think, the
It's
reality of maturity and understanding adults and parents. They're not
yeah,
perfect. And
totally,
when
exactly.
you're a child as well, you sort of you haven't got the capacity or the context to explain your own feelings. And It was just such a it was such a complex and not even like I can't expect that there was like all bows are tied up sort of situation, but it was just it felt you came through this path, and it was also very liberating. And um, I wanted to talk to you about the way it was shot and how you cut it together. It was a creative work of art. It wasn't just. I think when there was the scene of the conception, there's all these beautiful flowers budding, and it was very um, a beautiful film.
Thank you.
How did your mother's clearly like going against the grain, doing their own path, fighting for it? How did that instill in you creating your own freedom or autonomy to make your own choices as a creative person?
I mean, I think the biggest thing, my moms were not, creative. They're creative, but they weren't artists, it's not like they were, so it's not like they were in the art world at all. One of my moms was a legal aid lawyer, and the other one was basically a stay at home mom. So I think they just always had this, my mother's always had this fierce belief once they came out, which one of my mom's Russo came out after being married twice to two different men for 7 years. So it was really hard fought. She was born in 1940. It took her, she tried to conform really bad, and she went to a shrink when she was 13 years old and said, I think I'm a lesbian. And he said, no, 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 you're not sick like that. Don't worry about it. You're going
Mm.
to come back to me when you have 5 children. So she kind of always knew who she was and suppressed it for so many years that I think finally when they both came out, and Robin talks about it in the documentary, as like the whole world went from black and white to color. They were so proud of being their true selves and living the life that they wanted to, that they just didn't want to let anyone fuck with that. And they wanted to be who they were and not live in shame and not live in the closet and not suppress themselves to make other people comfortable. And so that was the ethos in which they raised my sister and I, to really just be who we are and not a lot of the things that I think women grow up with from culture, from their family, from who knows what, is shame, and a feeling of, oh, we're supposed to sort of be quiet or please men, or, all of this baggage that we have. And I think my sister and I, by virtue of our mothers, actually was able to escape a lot of that. I mean, I still have my own mishigas for sure. I am not a not fucked up person, but a lot of that sense of like kind of shame eluded us, and we were able to be strong girls, women who were in touch with who we wanted to be or who we are.
Do you have an intention to put that into or these explorations into your narrative works? Or maybe you could share how do you find the stories for your films that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I should sort of start from the beginning, I think, a little bit, in that my narrative path, like my path to narrative filmmaking, has been a sort of interesting winding road of discovery. Um, my first film, like the first film I ever made or the first one that played film festivals and stuff, was a short that was a experimental version of Psycho, where three different actresses played Marion Crane on three different screens. And they did three scenes from the movie, and different Marions did different things in each of those scenes. And that kind of affected their fate in the shower scene. And they ended up going into each other's screens. So it was sort of this like feminist twist take on Psycho. We replicated as best we could the cinematography. Um, so, and then I made a tiny indie movie with literally like two girls in the wilderness. It was a cast and crew of 6 people total, um, called Orphans, that I was like really into Ingmar Bergman at the time. Um, and that ended up playing like South by Southwest and other festivals, and was my first like feature. And I made that when I was 24, like with just very little money, very DIY. And I think so then, my the two films that I made after that were both independent. One was written with Lena Dunham. It's called Nobody Walks. That was like my first real film that had actors in it: John Krasinski, Rosemary DeWitt, Olivia Thirlby. And that was when working co-writing with Lena, I was like, she's an incredible writer. This is literally before Tiny Furniture. Um, and because I think I'd always struggled with the writing aspect of filmmaking. I'm dyslexic, which I think has something to do with it. But I always felt like I knew what my first film taught me was where I was really strong and where I wasn't, which is an amazing process when making an indie film, because you can really just kind of see that first film. It really teaches you like, oh, I'm amazing visually. I love working with actors. I have a sense of storytelling, but somehow the kind of more conventional narrative structure of filmmaking I had not quite mastered at that point. And Lena has it like in her veins. Like she just innately understands it. And so working with her was really eye-opening in terms of the writing and the writing of the film. And so then after that film, after Nobody Walks, which went to Sundance and kind of felt like a big moment, then sort of nothing happened in terms of filmmaking. And I was trying to get another film made, and that was really, really difficult. And I was sort of I took a lot of meetings in Hollywood and felt like, oh, maybe I'm going to make a bigger film. And then nothing happened. And then I was starting to develop something that I had written, and another film came my way that was like based on a young adult book about a girl who lives the day she dies over and over again, called Before I Fall. And I had really liked the script, and I felt like this was a movie that had these kind of like existential roots to it. It was and ultimately had like a message that I appreciated, just about sort of like what it was like to be a good person. Like what does that mean in the context of high school and friendship dynamics? And so I made that movie. And I think I've just always been, and then the trajectory goes on, but I think I've always been a little bit like one foot in the mainstream and wanting to make films that can be seen by large audiences, but then also my tastes running very personal and a little bit more on the indie filmmaking side. And it's always been a little bit of a balance of both. And I think certainly in the film industry, there's this pressure to kind of do one thing or be one thing or like do this kind of film or just, and I sort of am like, I'm just gonna like forge my own path and do things that I like and I'm interested in, regardless of like size or medium. Like I don't have to make the same kind of film. If I can float between genres, great. There are thrillers that I love. There are indies that I love. There are little dramas. There are comedies. I actually enjoy all kinds of films. And when I look at someone like Mike Nichols, I don't think he is in a box necessarily.
I was thinking about, in New York City and growing up with that kind of experimental, independent scene, and you were maybe at a time when it became accessible to get a digital camera and
No, I
start doing
was.
things on your own. And also, from you share a lot of your filming as a child growing up and having that kind of home video. And I'm not saying a home video as in it's clunky, but it's a bit more intimate. And I watched You Won't Miss Me with Stella
Yeah.
Schnabel, which I just found that to be such a incredible film. Not only the narrative, but also the way it was shot. Like
Mm,
it felt like a home video, or it didn't feel like a home video. It felt like it had that different feeling from a commercial. Like Nobody Walks,
yeah.
it's more polished. It's got, and I don't necessarily want more polished, or there's something about that
Rawness.
rawness, yeah, which is really beautiful, and you can see it through other work, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so funny that you mentioned that movie because that's literally one of my favorite movies that I've made, both in process and in result. And in terms of the final film, that's the second movie that I made. So my first movie, Orphans, I learned so much on that movie. I was so controlling. I really discovered a lot. I learned so much about myself. I storyboarded every frame. I was doing all the terrible first time director things where I was like over talking to the actors too much. And I was just trying to control everything. And I felt that in the footage. Like when I was editing it, I felt like it felt almost like restraint. It felt like tight. And I wanted things to be looser and I wanted things to be more free. And I'm this combination of like very type A
Mm-hmm.
and liking things really raw and no bullshit. And so I was trying to find the line between that. And I felt like on my first film, I went way too type A. And so then the second one, I kind of, in reaction almost to the first, I sort of let everything go and was
Mm.
like, no, 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 you don't need a script. Like, stop with the script. Cause, the first one I was torturing over the story and the script and every word and all that stuff. So the second one came out really naturally of Stella Schnabel's older sister Lola and I had been best friends literally since second grade and went through all of our schooling together. And I grew up sort of at Lola and Stella's house as like the big scary cool house that I would hang out with and had sleepovers and learned everything. Like literally like first vibrator, first smoke pot, like you name it, I did it there. Dressing up in costumes, like all of it, so much fun. And it was so I ran into Stella, who I knew as my best friend's younger sister, growing up. At a party and she said, "Oh, you're making movies," because she had heard that my first movie had premiered. "I want to be an actress. Let's do something together." And I was like, "Sure, let's do it." And so we met together. And I had always found Stella kind of fascinating. Like my memory of her as a kid was that she was filled with rage. She was the most angry little girl I'd ever met. She would just terrorize Lola all the time and was so incredible in that way, like so strong-willed and intense. And so we sat down and we created this character together. We sort of wrote a brief biography of the character that was kind of like Stella, but like taken to some kind of extreme place, like loosely, but like far, far out of Stella's. And then I called the cinematographer from my first film, and I said, "Will you come over?" And she said, "Sure." And she came over with her camera, and I interviewed the character Shelley for like 2 hours. And so we were just like laying down kind of the story, and she was improvising. And then we had some friends come over, and then we just shot her with her friends in character, but just sort of like improvisational. And then I went home and I edited the footage and I showed it to some friends of mine. I was like, "This is fascinating, right? Like, this is really interesting." And people were like, "Yeah, this is really interesting. Her face is like a car accident. You kind of can't look away." And I was like, "Okay, so maybe there's something here. Like, I don't know if it's a short film or whatever it is." And then I wrote a few more scenes of like that I would want to see the character in, basically. And we shot a little bit more. No one was paid. So rough, so DIY. Um, and then I edited that together. And now I had like half an hour. And it was like a kind of compelling half an hour. Showed it to more people, applied to some grants that I had applied to for my first film and had been turned down on. And then I got like a grant. And so then I used that money to shoot more and wrote more scenes. Showed it to some people. And it was this process basically over the course of a year of writing, shooting, raising money, editing, writing, shooting, editing, raising money. And so by the time the year was over, I had the finished film basically because I'd been editing it while I was going. And sometimes I added things like the idea of her being in a psychologist in a mental hospital that came later. And then we sort of added that to the film as this device. Um, so it evolved really naturally. And I thought, I always knew it was about her character and her character's psychology. And I felt like because that I wanted the medium of the film to reflect her psychology, basically. So when she's in a really rough state, let's shoot on a flip camera. Or if she's going and she's trying to be fancy and trying to be normal more, let's like shoot on something more refined. So it allowed us to shoot on a lot of different mediums and textures, which I love, and hopefully have those textures reflect where the character is at psychologically.
What I found incredible about that, I just thought, how did you write that? Like the emotional intensity of that film, and I wanted to maybe uh, navigate this with you, is how do you even put together those kind of scripts and ideas and emotional understanding it, and then have it in a put it in a film? Like it feels like a huge.
With the two projects that we're talking about is like it wasn't really that scripted. It was more about like the two, Nuclear Family and You Won't Miss Me, are both projects with people that I
Chopped together.
knew, that I thought were fucking fascinating, that I sort of took an unusual route to making it with. You know, it wasn't like a let me go write a script and then give you the script and then have you do it. I think that does yield a certain amount of more refined results, and something that's a little bit more experimental in terms of its approach, where it's a little bit more documentary. It's kind of written, it's kind of scripted, it's kind of not really. You can feel it in how it's.
I couldn't believe it. I would say it's one of my, for me, it just so deeply hit me in a very, I don't even like, I don't know how to describe film genres in that way of what it actually is in terms of a film, but it was so powerful and disturbing. And there's a scene when they're in the hotel at Atlantic
Yeah.
City, and it's so amazing. It was just spectacular, and I can feel that, like that feeling of Stella. She just, maybe even if it was a different character, it wouldn't have, a different
No,
actress.
totally. I mean, yes, it was definitely a movie that was made with Stella, for Stella. And like it was a really incredible collaboration with a person that I'd known for many, many years. And I have a project now that I'm working on with a friend that I've known for 27 years. We realize we met in high school, and he is writing it, but it's about, in a way, like it's really his story, but it is also about the dynamic between him and me and another boy in high school that we met. So I do think like maybe the truest best wheelhouse is when I find or remember friends that I people that I just think are really interesting and really talented, and it's the collaboration. Because that is the thing ultimately also about film, about like, is that it's such a collaborative medium, and I love that process of working with someone that I'm inspired by and interested in.
When you're working with a writer, for example, do they then hand it to you, or do you continually work with them, or do you, in a way, go, this is how I see it, and this is what I'm just interpreting it? Or is there a collaborative?
It really depends on the writer, the project. I've done it all. I've done it where we're passing it back and forth. I've done it where I'm just giving notes. I've done it where I'm giving notes and then I get in there. Um, or we just talk about it. We go to lunch. I mean, I just had lunch with a great writer that I love that's writing a script. Here's the area that I'm having a hard time with. Let's talk about it. So it just totally depends on the project.
And something I find interesting, and I wanted to ask you, is about how you have to have an understanding of some very nuanced uh, experience between people, or a confrontation between people, or a deep emotional kind of subliminal space. And do you think that, do you have an idea, or do you have a wisdom and experience of this is what I want to be conveyed, or it comes through the writing, or is that something you
I think it really
preempt?
depends on the story and where it comes from, and whether I'm writing it or someone else. Like if it's based on a book, then there's something in the book, and it's like, well, what is it about the book that's compelling? And like, what is the core idea? I was listening to this podcast called The Screenwriting Life, and they were talking about working with Jodie Foster, and she always says like, "What's the big beautiful idea?" And that really stuck with me because I do think like isolating, whether it's beautiful or ugly, like what is the thing that is actually the sticky thing of the work, you know? Once you know that, then you kind of everything else can kind of like land into place around that thing. But without that thing, it's sort of like you're just moving the pieces around. Um, so that's helpful, like especially when if you are adapting a book or starting with something original, it's like, well, what are we trying to say here? What's the thing?
And do you know in the beginning, or sometimes it just comes through in the end?
I don't. Sometimes I know in the beginning. Sometimes I figure it out in the middle. Sometimes I figure it out a little too late, or like after the movie's done, you know? It's helpful to know earlier. Sometimes it's also like a process of discovery, you know, and that can be okay.
Sure.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, I think I'm still figuring out my process and figuring out how to do it and experimenting with different ways, you know, ways of doing it. I know a lot, but I also am still finding it.
Do you welcome mistakes in your work, or I don't think failures is the right word, but things that are just didn't
I
sit
mean, I
right,
see everything as a
you
learning
just have to accept
experience.
it.
I really do, and a
Mm.
accruing of knowledge. You know, like so. I definitely, when I finish anything, I kind of try to take an inventory of what I learned or what I would do differently, or like a note to self. You know, make sure, and it can be anything. It could be super practical. Like make sure you check that anyone's references before you hire them. You know, something as simple as that, or like remember that you really like to storyboard, you know, or not, you know, or like remember to shoot on different mediums or get takes of people talking on the phone. Like it can be all kinds of things. So I don't know about, I think when I am shooting, I like to have it feel playful and not to like so that there's like room to kind of experiment within, you know, it's not like I want every take to be the same. I want to be able to like work within, to have people feel like safe and like they can try things. I think that's really really important to me. So in a way I would say like there are no mistakes, you know, because like sometimes you try things and they don't work, but that's okay because you're getting to another thing, or you're, or like you have to, it's like you have to throw pizza at the wall and see what sticks, and not every piece, not everything is going to stick, but that's okay because that's the process. So I try to respect the process, and not see it as mistakes, but I don't try to go in to make mistakes. But I try to go in to play
Sure, of course.
with a sense of discovery.
With nuclear family, maybe it wasn't something you could just come out of college and shoot it straight away. It's like you needed to do those other films and find some kind of rhythm before that could even be digested as a film, not even personally.
Yeah, I think it was both. I think it was a confluence of accrued skill level, you know, but also sitting with the story for so long and letting my feelings kind of gestate.
Do you like walking?
I love walking.
I think in New York City, probably people walk, but I noticed in You Won't Miss Me and in Nobody Walks, which also has it in the title, the female will go off and just walk in the city on their own.
Yes, I'm definitely a big person on movement. It really helps me. Like when I like, you know, people always have meetings in Los Angeles where they sit and they have coffee, and I'm like, can we go for a walk instead? Because when I move, my ideas flow. So I do love to like move or walk, or I got into dancing recently, which is so fun.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fun. Do you have future projects in mind that you want to do?
Yes. Yes. I have quite a few projects in various different stages. Some are, I'm in the process of finding the right producer for it. In one in particular, I have a couple projects that are set up already, like at a studio or with a company, and the writer is doing another pass on the script. So it's like just different stages of things. Yeah.
Can you work with several things on at one time?
Yes, absolutely. You kind of have
Yeah.
to, because
Yeah,
there's
because it takes such a long period of time.
exactly, yeah. So yeah, I have like multiple projects at different stages right now.
So I like to ask everyone, what do you celebrate?
What do I celebrate? Well, I am finishing a two-part documentary series that's going to be on Hulu in June about the podcast Call Her Daddy, and the person who
Oh,
worked on it
amazing.
called Alex Cooper. Her name is, who's the podcaster. She's the number one podcaster, female podcaster in the world. And so I try to celebrate, like projects take so long to come to fruition, and then to do and to execute and then to edit, and then the final, it's like we locked picture yesterday. So I try to celebrate those moments when you do finish something and you have that feeling of like, I should have that feeling of like accomplishment and happiness, and just like let those moments rest and be like, yes, I did that. Now let me, have a drink or whatever it is. Or have a little fun, or to be with my kids. Not that I'm not with them when I'm working, but still, it's so, yeah, I think it's important to celebrate the moments of completion and finishing. Um, and I think it's also just important to sort of celebrate life and do what is fun. Like I had a conversation with my mom, I guess it was yesterday, where we were just, they're in New York right now and I'm in LA, so I don't, where we were just basically like shopping on the phone together. We were buying things first for my sons, and clothing, and looking at, like, we'd go to the same website and scroll through, and then we turned into buying me dresses, and like looking at dresses together, and we'd be like, what do you think about that one? Oh no, that one's too ugly. Oh, they're so ugly, let's go to this website. And so we were just like doing that for like an hour, and it was so freaking fun. Like we just had a great time because we have the same taste and style, and you think that would look good on me, and anyway. So I think it's just, celebrate feels like one word, but also just like having fun. Like where's like the joy? And sometimes you just have to kind of like let go to enjoy things.
No, absolutely. Do you come back to New York often?
Yes. At least twice a year, sometimes more, sometimes a bit more. Because sometimes I work in New York, like when I shot and just like that, um I was in New York for like 3 months. So yes.
And there were episodes, weren't
Yes,
they?
2 episodes.
Yeah. How do you feel about doing those shorter projects? Is there less, you're talking about control, is there less autonomy of how things work with those big
Absolutely. Yeah,
productions?
yeah, yeah. You're much more just kind of come in and do a job. But that can be really fun, to just come in and use all of your skill and join this universe that's like this legacy universe that people are obsessed with, and get into that and really know that universe so well and speak its language. Like that can be very fun and fulfilling for 3 months, and then you leave, you know. Yeah, I've enjoyed some of that.
Are there directors, artists, people that have really pointed you in a direction of how you make films, or do you watch certain type of
I
film?
mean, I watch so much. I watch all kinds of movies. I'd really like to watch a diverse swathering of films, everything from Kiarostami to Altman to lesser known films of the 70s. I mean, neo noir. I love old films, new films, documentaries. So I try to watch a ton because I think it's all educational. In terms of directors, I think the thing that I'm in a directors group, a writer director group, and the thing we were just talking about yesterday, we have weekly Zooms, is is just how the kind of like this, we're all like artists, and yet we're also in this industry, and there's this tension between like the industry's idea of your value and then your own sort of like creative world and practice and process. and how to kind of reconcile that and how to sort of shut out the noise, but when do you need to be aware of the noise? I think for me, like one thing that I take kind of this solace in that helps me is like all the directors that I look at whose careers I really respect, who have made really interesting work, from literally like Robert Altman to Darren Aronofsky to like, anyone, you name it, Agnes Varda. It's like they've made different kinds of movies and their career as a career has fluctuated. You know, they've had movies that are really successful, they've had movies that aren't, that nobody watches, that people don't like or slam, and they're still an incredible artist, and you can't sort of like be at the behest of what other people think of you and of the trends or the times. Like you have to kind of beat to your own drum in your own creative way, um, and be inspired by what you're going to be creatively into and excited by. And I think that that's something that I keep and hold close and remind myself of often, because I'm just going to sort of do my work that makes sense to me. And I think about the audience a lot, but a lot of that sort of noise sometimes needs to just like settle.
How do you do that? Because I think even particularly with Hollywood and that's probably a very loud
Yeah,
voice.
no, it is a loud voice. And it
How do
takes,
you
well, one thing is to just continue, and it takes a lot of awareness in a way to do that.
mm,
And I think a lot of it is just trying to really stay connected to what I love and to the work itself. And that's why I think part of the reason even I have to watch so much, because none of that is about the actual work. It's not about the creative. It's not about like what's going on screen really. So staying attached to like what I'm doing and the relationship between what is actually on film and what matters and all of that is, it's just a continuized process. Continuized is not a word, but you know what I mean.
I was having a conversation with my father and he said people now just make up words
Definitely. I've always made up
because
words.
it was in response to me talking. Um, yeah, I think it's very hard. Is there an intuition or is there a feeling that keeps you guided, or like how much of that is intellect and how much of that is just knowing of who I am
No, a lot of it is,
and
a
like
lot of it
holding
has to
that
be
space?
conscious, I think. For me, a lot of it is, I mean, it, you know, I am who I am, but then I also just have to, because sometimes you can feel the anxiety creep in or the nerves or the sense of lack of insecurity, and then I have to sort of consciously shut it down with saying that to myself. And sometimes it rears its head more than other times, you know. Sometimes I'm fine, and then other times it just comes in, and it's like, but just knowing like that is literally part of the process, and that's okay. And like, and a while ago, I realized like fear is part of the process. It's terrifying to make work and to think that it's worthy of other people's attention. Like, wow, what a notion, you know, and that you're the thing that you're going to do. People are going to care. Like all of that, I think is um, really hard. And so, of course, we're scared to make something and to put it out there, and all of that, and to sort of just acknowledge that that is literally a good thing, because it means you care, and it means that you're going to sort of dangerous places, and that fear is part of the process, and to just like embrace the fear and not be afraid, or and what I mean is not be afraid to make something that feels outside of the box or dangerous. Like I have a bulletin board in front of my desk, and it has all kinds of things on it that are inspiring, or sometimes it's just images I like or whatever. And one thing I have on there is a post-it note that says "fuck some shit up," which is just like, don't do the thing. What that means to me is like, don't do the thing that has been done or that people expect you to do. Do the thing that is different, not just to be different, but that is like the most you and the most weird, and that is true to you. Which sometimes in film is like we see a lot of the same kind of thing. And how do
Mm.
we see something different? That again is true. Not just to be different, but to be true. I keep using that word. Anyway, yes.
There's a quote that you share at the start of Nuclear Family. I can't find it. It's about what have you done to disappoint your parents?
I think it's what have you done lately
And
to break your mother's heart?
and I wasn't bringing that up because of your parents, but just about that idea of expectations, of like how to deal with societal expectations and forge against it, or like break away from it in a way. And I think I think exactly what you're saying. It's like if we did everything that everyone was doing, then I wouldn't want to watch that many films. And I feel you've just talked about putting all this effort into making a film and breaking through that fear. And then what I feel about the films that you make is they're on the edge. Like they're so on the edge of shaking something that I feel as an audience, you've really committed to being in that space, and you could have sat a little bit back from it and it was a bit safer.
Interesting.
But I've felt that I've been taken to somewhere just a bit shocking, whether it be good or bad shocking, not in a negative way, but I've been pushed into a space that I think, oh, like that was
Well,
that was a bit juicy.
I think that is a good thing, because I
Yeah,
think to me it's interesting. It's like, why bother making anything, or movies especially, I guess, if I'm not going to challenge the medium in some way, if I'm not going to like push it forward however I can.
absolutely. Yeah,
So I think that is part of like what I look to do, but not for the
I
sake of
really
it.
admire you for
Yeah,
that.
no, thanks. But
Yeah,
it's not to like do it just to do it. It's to do it because I think more can be done within this space. Like there is a way that things have been done, but why do they have to be done that way? Can't they be done other ways? And maybe those other ways are more natural, certainly to me, and maybe to other people, like yeah.
no, I think it's very important. I'll finish off with one question. Do you have any fairy tales that you loved, or childhood myths that were just so
Well, it's really funny that you say that,
important for
because
you?
we were talking about fairy tales earlier, and when I was in college, I went to Oberlin, and it was like the first time I explored telling the story of my known sperm donor and my mom's and all of it, and I did a mixed media performance piece that had live music and video, and I was performing in it. It was like a solo performance piece, and it was basically the story of my biological father suing my mom's, but told through the lens of Little Red Riding Hood. So it took Little Red Riding Hood and made him sort of into the wolf, and I had my lesbian moms like in red hoods dancing together, and I kind of told that, but also told the story of sort of like me coming out as straight because I thought I was a lesbian when I was younger and figuring that out. So it was my very first blush into telling that story, but it was through the lens of this specific fairy tale. And I was pretty obsessed with fairy tales in general during college, and specifically with Little Red Riding Hood as a story, because I found it so disturbing and fascinating, and just visual. The Red Hood in the forest, and then I had like a movie of, I had I had a PD 150. Speaking of like the digital era, that was my first camera that I got in college, and I just took it everywhere. And I took a red hood everywhere. So I would film myself running through the woods in a red hood. Then in walking in New York, I like snuck into a construction site, and then I was in Paris visiting a friend, and I shot me in Paris running through the woods, like from the wolf. And so anyway, it was like traverse. It was like that Maya Deren film, Continuity of Movement, where you're like moving from different locations, but the hood is the same and the movement is the same, but like the place keeps changing.
That's kind of an interesting reflection of just making films.
Yeah, totally.
Like
Yeah,
there's this thread.
right.
I'm so excited to see what you continue to make and produce. I love your work. I think for me, it resonates with me on a level that is really
Thank you.
exciting. Well, thank you so much for talking with
No,
me.
thank you for doing this podcast. Happy to join.
Thanks, Ry. Thank you for listening to We Are Art People. You can listen to full episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We are online at www.weareartpeople.com. Sign up to our newsletter for show updates and happenings, and please share with someone who may enjoy listening. See you next time.